All right. If you're like me, you've been watching all the things that have been going on in the world, everything that's happening to Israel, all the earthquakes, all the different things, all the fires in California, just basically everything that's going on the planet points to the return of Christ pretty soon. Like, it looks like it's got to be in the next 2 or 3 years at the most, and even maybe within a year. I've been watching a lot of videos on YouTube, and a lot of people are talking about, this final blood moon that showed up on 121:19, and talking about the prophetic significance of that blood moon. So I was thinking, let's just pretend for a moment that the rapture and tribulation is going to occur in the year 2019. I just picked that date, and I thought, what we'll do? Let's like reverse engineer everything. We'll just start with that date, and then we'll start looking at things 7 years in the future and 7 years in the back into the past. So what I did was I built this little chart here, and I laid out all the blood moons starting in 12, 21, 10, all the way through 3, 3, 26. And so then we start here with the rapture and tribulation 2019. It's pretty simple here. We just go and we start in trumpets, because typically trumpets is when the tribulation is, for most people, if you watch a lot of videos, that's typically when we think that the tribulation is going to start in the fall, and it's going to start in trumpets. So what I did here was I went and I added 1260 days to that date. It could be another date in the fall. They all work because there's a big gap between the moons here. And that puts the midpoint of the tribulation puts it at 2/12/23. You can see it right here. Then if we take 2/12/23 and we add 1260 days, that's another 3.5 prophetic years. That brings us to 7/26/26. And you'll see in this series of blood moons, the last blood moon is on 3/3/26. So that puts the end of the tribulation outside of here. Now I've also added 1290 and 1335, and that's from the book of Daniel, where in the book of Daniel there's an additional 30 and there's an additional 45. So that definitely brings the end of the tribulation into the fall, if that's when it fully ends. So as you see here, we've got this series of 3 blood moons that end 19, and the next one is not until 21. So if we have a rapture and tribulation, it fits really nicely between this. This whole thing patterns out really nice. And you'll see here that we have 3 blood moons before the tribulation, or the midpoint of the tribulation, when the Antichrist enters the temple, and then we have 3 after. And then it's a 7-year period, and we have 6 blood moons during a 7-year period, and 7 and 6 equals 13. And biblically, the number 13 has to do with rebellion, has to do with apostasy, defection, corruption, disintegration, and revolution. So this all fits in here really well. And then in the future here, in a few minutes, I'll talk about these 3 blood moons here, and the way that these are split 1 and 2. They're going to come into play in another area that I'm going to be talking about. Okay, so if we go back now from the fall of 2019, if we go back 7 years, that brings us back to 2012. And if you remember, there's a lot of things about the end of the world. The Mayan calendar comes to an end, the Aztec calendar. There's a whole bunch of number of things that occur in 2012. The reality is, though, that in the Mayan calendar, a lot of the prophecies that were there, the world isn't coming to an end. It's the dawning of a new age. It's like the dawning of the age of Aquarius. In some of the prophecies, there are 2 people who are going to come on the scene, and these people sound like the false prophet and the Antichrist. They're going to bring about a new world order, a new what's the word I'm looking for here? Another type of a new awakening, basically, is what they're going to bring into the world. And that's what we see right in this particular area. And that's what the prophecies pointed to. So then the question we have to ask is, okay, did something or did somebody appear in that time slot? And that slot fits really nicely between this set of 3 moons here and then the Lunar Tetrad, 2012 and 2013. And so then if you notice something here too, the number 13 is really big in the occultic world. Pope Francis shows up on 3/13/2013. I'll be talking about that in just a minute. All right, the next thing I want to cover here on this chart that I have is we have that broken up into 2 7 years, again going back to 2012. And the reason the 2 7 years split like this is important is because you think back into the days of Joseph and Pharaoh and what happened back then. a demonically possessed pharaoh. You have to understand who this person was. They had this ritual they go through, and they put a spirit into the pharaoh, and he really becomes like a type of god. And God takes this demonically possessed pharaoh, this leader, and he gives this pharaoh a dream about what is going to come into the future. And then Joseph comes along and he interprets the dream. He interprets the dream correctly as to what it is, because obviously God is working with him, and God is also working with this demonically possessed leader, this Pharaoh, to bring about what? He's about to bring about the salvation of what? The nation of Israel. Here we have, typically Satan is spending all this time trying to destroy the Jews, to try to destroy the bloodline of Messiah. And here we have, again, a demonically possessed leader, Pharaoh, Satan's man. And here he is. He puts a Jew in charge of, he's second in charge. And he actually brings about the salvation of the Jewish nation. And he also comes and he protects the line of the Messiah by preparing. They get the food. Everybody has to come to Pharaoh and to Joseph in order to survive. And Pharaoh becomes like the most powerful man in the world. And that's kind of a type of what's going to happen here. Excuse me. I have a cold. That's the type of what's going to happen here with the Antichrist and the false prophet. You're going to have two people who are really dead set on destroying Israel, but God is going to take and he's going to use these two people, and he's going to use them to bring about the salvation of Israel. He's going to go into the temple. They're going to think he's the Messiah. He goes in the temple. He desecrates the temple, and then they realize he's not the Messiah. And this whole thing brings about the salvation. Then they realize he's not the Messiah, and then they're going to turn to it and find out who the real Messiah is. And only a remnant of the Jews will be saved, but it's going to bring about. And that's basically what happened here. It's kind of a type when you look back at Pharaoh and you look at Joseph. They kind of did the same thing. That's what's going to happen here in the future. And that's why it's important. It's also important, too, because Pharaoh, when I begin talking about what occurred with Pope Francis and then this other Antichrist forerunner, this person, we know that this person here has come to, he's been put in like the two people. He is most likely the false prophet, or he's a forerunner to the false prophet. And if we know that he is here, then more than likely this person here has been put into power. And then the question is, how do they put him into power? And I'm going to be talking about that. And it goes back to Egypt too. So in a minute here, we will get to that. Pope Francis comes to power on 3/13/2013. The choice of these numbers is not by coincidence. When you get into the occultic world, these are really, really big numbers here. And what they're doing is they're trying to show other people, the illuminated, those who understand. They're showing like, look, we've taken control of the Vatican. We're in power now. We're going to run the show. And Tom Horner's book, Zenith 2016, he says, the title here is, Did Something Begin in the Year 2012 That Will Reach Its Apex in 2016? At the time he wrote this book, they're kind of thinking that's when the tribulation would start with this guy, and then it would kind of reach its zenith in 2016. We know that didn't happen, but the book is filled with all sorts of things that are, I think the reality is, it began in 2012, the false prophet and the Antichrist, or his forerunner. These two guys may not be the final pair, but they are preparing the way for him, and they're doing things in society to get society ready for a one world leader. And so I want to get back to, let's get back to the date that the Pope was elected. Okay, this is a page from the book here. It says, the Apostle John, the book of Revelation, describes very plainly how the leader of the world religious system based in Rome will pave the way for the rise of the man who will be the Antichrist. Unfortunately for that churchman, the Antichrist and the false prophet will later turn on him and destroy the religious system and the city. Another interesting and possibly noteworthy aspect of the final pope is the timing of his arrival. While we ourselves don't put a lot of stock in numerology, mystics do, and the great biblical scholar and Anglican theologian E.W. Bullinger wrote an exhaustive treatise in the 19th century which has yielded some interesting connections to the new pontiff and the Masonic beliefs discussed earlier in this chapter. Just like on the Great Seal of the United States, the number surrounding Pope Francis' election kept coming up 13. White smoke at 7:06 equals 7 plus 6 equals 13. He's 76 years old. 7 plus 6 equals 13. He was elected on the calendar date 3/13/13, which sports two 13s of its own. 3/13/2013 also yields, when you add the whole thing together, you get 13. He was announced at precisely 8:13 Vatican time, or military and European time, 2013, making for an astounding 3/13/2013 at 2013. So it's pretty obvious here that this was deliberate and on purpose. the people who are in charge. You have to understand too, in the Vatican, you have all this pedophilia going on. You have there's all this really bad stuff going on with all these priests. A lot of these priests, they belong basically to the dark side. They're part of the Illuminati, part of the Freemasons, the secret societies. So then he goes on here. He says, as to the significance of 13, all are aware that it's come down to us as a number of ill omen. Many superstitions cluster around it, and various explanations are current concerning them. Unfortunately, those who go backwards to find a reason seldom go back far enough. The popular explanations do not, so far as we are aware, go further back than the apostles, but we must go back to the first occurrence of the number 13 in order to discover the key to its significance. It occurs first in Genesis 14:4, where we read, 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and the 13th year they rebelled. Hence every occurrence of the number 13, and likewise of every multiple of it, stamps that with which it stands in connection with rebellion, apostasy, defection, corruption, disintegration, revolution, or some other kindred idea. Okay, so I just talked about the Pope and the number 13. We saw that paired out here. And then, as I titled this this video here, there are 13 blood moons until the midpoint of the tribulation. If we start counting here now, I consider these first 3 moons here kind of a marker, kind of like a decimal point. The real signs in the heaven really begin with the Lunar Tetrad. That's really pointing to this. And then we have the solar eclipse, which points to the judgment coming on the world. And then we have the Revelation 12 sign sandwiched in between the 4x3 blood moons, pointing to the rapture of the church before the tribulation starts. And so if we count here, there's 3, and we got 7, that's 10, 11, 12, 13. There are 13 blood moons to the time that he takes, goes into the, desecrates the temple. And then if you count again, starting here from this is when I believe like the sign really begins here. You have your 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and this is when he is basically thrown out, and Christ comes down and gets rid of him. So basically that's where you get your 2 13s. And again, like we see, the number 13 here is a really big, and it just happens to appear in this pattern of blood moon. So that's where that comes in. The next thing I want to do here is I want to talk about Revelation 13:8, and I'm just going to read this here quick. This calls for wisdom. Let one who understands calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of man, and his number is 666. There's a lot of Christians who believe that everything that happened in the book of Revelation happened back in the days of Nero, because Nero, when they converted his name to numbers, his number came to 666, and he really was a type of Antichrist. And if you saw the heinous things that he did back in that day, he was definitely a type of the Antichrist. And the reason I bring this up is because I was thinking when I was doing this, I thought, what if there's more to all these signs, or what if we assign numbers to the series of blood moons here? And again, like the reason I started with this, I look at this as a series starting here. This I consider again as a place marker. Just you get a start, it creates the gap, and there's 3 in a row here. Then we have the Lunar Tetrad, which is 4. So we've got a 3, a 4, a 3, a 1, 2, and a 3. Now, what's interesting here too is that the tribulation lasts for 3.5 years. So we've got 3 blood moons here, and this makes, like, look, it's like 1/half. And then you got another 3, 3.5. So this is almost prophetic in that sense too. It's like you've got 2 3.5s, and the tribulation is broken into 2 3.5-year periods. So again, like I was thinking here, okay, what if we convert these blood moons to numbers and see? So what I did was I broke them into 3, because when you think of 666, when you break them into 3 and you put them into a gematria type situation, that's when you really get most of your stuff. And so like with Nero, or with the mark of the beast, the number of the man is 666. So if we break these into groups of 3, so I looked at 3, 4, 3, then I took 4, 3, 1, and then 3, 1, 2, and then 1, 2, 3. And the interesting number here is that really popped out that it was like this 3.5, because in some sense we see 3.5 and 3.5. And so what I did was I started with the 3.5, and what I want to do here first though is, before I get to that, is I want to explain exactly how this works, because the result I got, I thought the thing was rigged. I was really shocked at what came up when I put this in here, but it's super simple. What we have here is basically you assign numbers. A gets a 1, and then Z gets 26, and that's what they call the English ordinal. And then you can reverse this. You can take it, and you can start with Z gets a 1, and you just flip it. And then there's a full reduction. That's like they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, then they just repeat it, and they do it backwards and forward. So that's the whole way this whole thing works. So what I did here was I thought, well, just for fun, I didn't really think anything was going to show up here. But so I put the number 312 into this, and this you can go online. You can find this thing, the Gematrianator. It works in English. It's a big thing in the Jewish with the original Jewish language. Well, the first thing you notice when you get here is what? Boom, the number 6 pops up. So you're going, holy smokes, what is this? Well, basically what this is, basically 312 adds up to 6. So that in itself is pretty interesting right there. But here's where things really, this is where I thought, okay, this thing is rigged, something's wrong. Okay, if you go down to the bottom here, I've run the match, and I'm showing the bottom guy. Okay, you see whose name is down here. This guy is a reverse ordinal. So basically when you have 1 is with Z, 312, this guy's name here. Now some of you probably don't know who this guy is, and you're wondering, well, yeah, who is this? George Mario Bergololi or whatever his name is here. And like, I know who this guy is, and I'll show you who he is here. It just happens to be the Pope. And so I'm like, now that's kind of wild and that's kind of crazy. We go and we run the numbers into this here, 312. There's 3.5 years in the tribulation. And who shows up? Number 1 on the list, Pope Francis. So that personally for me is enough to be convincing. I don't know if it's, there's not coincidences, but it's just kind of weird, okay? So we've got that down. I'm going to keep going here because there's more that's going to happen. The next guy I want to talk to here is about this guy, the Antichrist, the forerunner. I'm going to figure out who this guy is. We talked about him, but before we talk about him, we got to talk about these secret societies and what do they believe. And this is from most of the material I have here, almost all the material on these secret societies comes from the book here, Zenith 2016. So what do they believe? And this is an article from Lucifer magazine. Believe it or not, there's such a thing exists. It says an article from Helen Blavatsky's Lucifer magazine, which was published by the Theosophical Society, that illuminated the inner doctrine of Rosicrucianism. I'm not exactly sure what that said, but Freemasonry and all the secret orders, that Lucifer is the angel of light who, in the form of a serpent, bids mankind to partake of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, so that their eyes would be open and they could become as gods. Even to this day, in the secret societies, Lucifer is considered the benevolent servant god who has nothing more than the best intentions for man, while Jehovah is an evil entity who tries to keep mankind in the dark and punishes him if he seeks the truest wisdom. We know that in 2013, we know that the Pope was empowered. So the big question is, who was empowered in 2012? So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the Vatican, and we're going to look at Washington, D.C. to find out. And the reason is you're going to see here you're going to see right away. Why? Let's see here. Sorry. Click on the screen. Okay. If you go back to ancient Egypt and you go back to Pharaoh, and this is why it connects with Joseph and everything, you're going to see these objects here. You're going to see an obelisk, and you're going to see a domed building. Again, an obelisk and a domed building. These are devices that are used to basically incarnate deity into a human being, basically to demon possess them. And it goes back to Pharaoh. These objects go back there, and that's where it originally comes from. And this again here is from the book Zenith 2016. If you really want to understand the whole deal, you really got to read that book. And then Tom Horn has another book. I think it's called, I'll have to remember what it is. I can't think of it at the moment. There's another one that came out in the last year here, so you can look it up. Let me read here. This is what this dome, and this is how this incarnation kind of thing works. It says the Dome of America's Temple, the obelisk, and the lost symbol. Undoubtedly, the vast majority of people, when looking at Washington, D.C. and at the Vatican, never comprehend how these cities constitute one of the greatest open conspiracies of all time. There, reproduced in all their glory and right before the world's eyes, is an ancient talismanic diagram based on the history and cult of Isis, Osiris, and Horus, including the magical utilities to generate the deity's return. The primal concept, especially that of sacred domes facing obelisks, was designed in antiquity for the express purpose of what? Regeneration, resurrection, and apotheosis, for deity incarnation from the underworld to the earth's surface through the union of the respective figures. The dome is an ancient structure representing the womb of Isis, and the obelisk is an ancient representation of the erect male phallus of Osiris. This layout, as modeled in antiquity, exists today on the grandest scale at the heart of the capital of the most powerful government on the earth, the United States, as well as in the heart of the most politically influential church on earth, the Vatican. Given this fact and the pattern provided by the Apostle Paul and the Apocalypse of John, the book of Revelation, that the end times would culminate in a marriage between political, Antichrist, and religious false prophet authorities, At the return of Osiris Apollo, it behooves open-minded researchers to carefully consider this prophecy in stone, as it defines the spiritual energy that is knowingly or unknowingly being invoked at both locations, with potential ramifications for Petrus Romanus, the year 2012, and beyond. In 2012, who was the president? President in 2012 was, of course, Barack Obama. Now, Barack Obama, if you remember when he got elected the first time, and what was it, 2008, when he gave his acceptance speech, he had his, at the Democratic Convention, the layout here was based on the Temple of Pergamon, the seat of Satan. He actually went to Berlin. He's taken trips there. It was written about in one of the German magazines when he went and he spoke at certain places and stuff like, why in the heck did he go here and do this or do that? And there's just things about Barack Obama. If you look at the things he's done, what he's done to this country since he took president, the direction that he pushed it in, he's definitely somebody who wants a borderless society, an open society. He's a globalist. He was definitely trying to, right now, he's part of the, in Washington, they have a kind of a shadow government set up, and he's part of that right here now, trying to overthrow the Trump administration. He's been involved in all sorts of things. He's definitely, just like the Pope is, he's definitely been pushing the country and the world, in the direction to accept the Antichrist, a one world ruler. Now, if you remember, I don't know how many of you've seen this, but there was a 15-year-old secular Jewish boy who died, and he went to heaven, and he received all these visions, and these visions just match up exactly what the Bible has to say. He talks about Jesus standing on the mountain, and the mountain splitting, and it actually splits. It's not a nuclear thing. It's quite the impressive thing to watch. He's a secular boy, and he supposedly knows nothing about the Bible, but he describes things right out of the Bible. It's like he's reading from it. And one of the things he does, though, the rabbi asks him, who is Gog, and he identifies Gog as Obama. Now, Obama, that doesn't mean Gog is necessarily the Antichrist. He could be a separate, but Gog is a person. And it wouldn't surprise me in the least if Obama, he's been involved in bringing so many things. They interview him. George Stephanopoulos interviews him, and he talks about how his Islamic faith, affects his life. And then George Stephanopoulos has to come out and say, you mean your Christian faith? Who does that? Nobody makes a mistake like that. And if you look at all the things that he says about Islam and not offending the Prophet Muhammad, and anyone who does is not worthy of things, it's very obvious this guy is something that he's a different person than he appears to be. So here's the next interesting thing that happens here. If you take Barack Hussein Obama's name, this is how it is. If you look at the top here, Barack Hussein Obama, and if you translate it into Arabic, it comes out like this. It comes out Barack Hussein and then an O and Obama. And that also equals that same number that we saw before that the Pope's name equals 312. Again, you take each letter of his name, you give it a value, and that also comes out to 312. I mean, I don't know. It's just kind of weird, and that's what you see, and that's what happens here. Now, I'm not much for translation. I don't know. I've put a link here to this guy. He talks about how the translation is done. I did some research. I don't know how real this is, but regardless of whether it's real or not, it does show up here as 312. If it turns out to be, this isn't really the way it works, that's fine too, because we don't really need that. All right. Okay, so for the last 7 years here, heading into 19, Pope Francis and Obama, or the forerunner, if it should not be him, but I really think it's him. They've been preparing the world. If you look at everything that these two guys are doing, you look at what the Pope's been doing. He basically comes out and says, all atheist, everybody goes to heaven. Christ died for everyone. You don't have to know him. You just have to follow your conscience. This is definitely, he is definitely an error here. And then you've seen everything that Obama's been doing, what he's done in this country here, what he's done with open borders and everything. So these two guys are basically preparing the way. And so at the same time that these two guys, remember, God is using them. These guys think they're in control, but they're not. I mean, this is all, God has communicated these people, all this stuff, and they're doing, just like with Pharaoh back in Egypt. He gives Pharaoh a dream. He tells things to Pharaoh in order to bring about his things. And that's the same thing that happens here. God is really in control, and he's going to use these people to bring about the salvation of Israel. And so at the same time, though, he said in Joel 2:31, the sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and awesome day of the Lord. And so that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing a grouping of 7 blood moons. Now that's kind of significant. I'll talk about that in a little bit here. But the sign here begins with the Lunar Tetrad. Now we know this Lunar Tetrad is really, it's pointing to this period of time here. But the thing is, we don't know, from the Lunar Tetrad to this time, we don't know how long that is. And then we also have the Revelation 12 sign. Now, for those of you who've been following the Revelation 12 sign, we thought that on 9/23/17, this would be a really good time for the rapture because that's when everything looked. And that was a really good theory, but obviously it hasn't turned out. So the question is, though, when is that going to happen? So that's also it's pointing to the rapture of the church before this period of time begins. And then we have the solar eclipse that occurred just before the sign of Revelation 12 here, that occurred in the constellation Leo, and which is the constellation of the Lion of the tribe of Judah, who's Jesus. And this is all tied into back, like even when Jesus came the first time, everything happens in the constellation Virgo and the constellation Leo, all the prophetic signs. And so we have that sign here, and that really, I think, is judgment on the United States. If you read Tom Horn's book and you understand who the founders of this country really are, I think 44 of the 56 signers were Freemasons. It might be a little bit lower number. It's hard to say, but that's what they think. There's 44, and these people, they have a really different goal than what the average Christian thinks. What their goal was, it really is to bring about this person, bring him into existence, and bring into the New World Order. But anyhow, back to the signs here. We have the Lunar Tetrad again pointing to that, and then we have the solar eclipse pointing to that, and then we have what's kind of interesting here is we have 7, and 7 has to do with the number of completion. And if you go into the book of Revelation, you'll see that the number 7 repeats over and over again. There are 7 bowls, and there are 7 angels, there are 7 churches, there are 7, over 7, 7, 7. And at the end of whatever 7 appears, at the 7 bowls, that's the completion. So then the question is, okay, when we look at this, are we looking at, we've got this here, we've got the Lunar Tetrad, we've got the solar eclipse, we've got the Revelation sign, and now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 is completion. So is this the completion of the sign 1, 2, 3 in 2019? And is that like demarking then? We have this gap in here, and really it could be in the fall of 2019 or also the fall of 2020, because you can push these dates around. It's 7 years depending how the date starts. So there's really kind of a 1.5, 2 year stretch in here, that gap between these two moons. And right now it appears as though this group here is pointing to this, and this is signifying completion. If you take 7 years times 7, 7 times 7 is 49. It's like a jubilee year, and on the 50th year, all the property, people return home to their homeland, and so we would be returning to heaven, is what would happen here. So we have that kind of jubilee theme going here, and then we also have the 7 times 6 theme going here. We've got 7 years of tribulation for the earth, and we have 6 blood moons. And those moons, 6 is the number of man. You think of 666, the beast, all that kind of stuff. And when you multiply them, you get, again, that number 13 showing up. We got the number 13 here. We have 13 blood moons brings you to here. And if you start here, it brings you 13 blood moons to the end. So you're seeing that kind of theme here. One more thing that I want to cover about like the number 7 here is, this is from Bollinger in his book on Numbers. In Revelation 6, there are 7 seals that are open, and the first are 4 horsemen, and the last 3 are all something very, very different. And you see that kind of pattern here again too. You've got 4 blood moons, and then you have the break here, and then you have this 3 here. It's a 4 by 3, and it's very common for 7 to be broken into 4 by 3. And so we saw the sign here, and then we had these other 2 signs falling here, and then we have this set coming in here. Okay, what's interesting about this now, we have this 4 by 3 that I was just talking about here. If we take, remember there are 7 feast days or 7 appointed times for things to happen. And what I basically did was I took those 7 and I overlaid them with these blood moons here. And you'll notice another interesting pattern that shows up here. We've got these first 4 blood moons here. This is Passover. We have unleavened bread. I've got first fruits, and then I have Pentecost. These first 4 have been fulfilled, and the clock has basically stopped. We're kind of in this gap here. These have been fulfilled. These 3, trumpets, Yom Kippur, are yet in the future. And now what's kind of interesting about this, yet to be fulfilled, Revelation 12 is about the rapture of the church. So all of these fit under this title, yet to be fulfilled. What's kind of wild about this is that the Revelation 9:23 sign fits in exactly in the location that it should, and so does the total solar eclipse. It fits in the gap between the fulfilled and yet to be fulfilled. The Revelation 12 sign didn't fit into here, it didn't show up here, it didn't show here, and it doesn't show up, let's say, later in here somewhere. It shows up, with the exact same pattern, this 4 by 3 pattern of, we've got 4 blood moons here, 4 blood moons pointing to this, pointing to the coming of this, predicting the future. These trumpets, Yom Kippur and Sukkot, the fulfillment of these blood moons are going to occur over here during the tribulation. And you have to remember that blood moons are pointing, in Jewish tradition, blood moons are talking about trouble coming to the country of Israel. And then you have like solar eclipses are talking about judgment coming to the world. And so what we see here is we've got 7 blood moons here, and 7 is completion. And so when we look at this, is this telling us that this was the, is this the timing? Is this the marker? We've got our 4 blood moons, and then we have the Revelation 12 sign. Now, we didn't know how long. Like Revelation 12 and these blood moons, it's like, is it 1 year? Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 4? I was thinking it was going to be 7 years. That's the longest anyhow. I thought from the Revelation 12 sign to its fulfillment, we could see 7 years. But the problem is things are accelerating the world. Things are going so fast. It has to be less time than that. It's got to be within, I would say, the next 1 or 2 years. And so is God like, this pattern here of 4 and 3 and 7 being completion. And now is this, we've got for the Jews here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 moons. Is the sign now complete? And now the signs are all done. And boom, right in here is when the fall of 2019 to 2020, this is when the rapture and tribulation. I think there's a good case to be made when you look at that. Look at the signs here that's a real possibility. It doesn't have to happen. This is an interpretation. Could be interpreted wrong. There might be another way to interpret this, but at the moment, this looks like the best way to do it. And again, it's amazing how this all works. The fulfilled are matched, and then the yet to be fulfilled are over here. And these 4 blood moons, and 7, there's 4 and 3, 7 have completed, and now this is going to start. Another thing I want to point out here is that if we assume the signs, like say this here is just a marker for me, this is a decimal point type deal. The signs really begin here with the Lunar Tetrad. If we count up the total number of signs, we've got 4 blood moons here, and we've got 3 here, so that's a total of 7, and then you have 8 and 9, so you have 9. So what the number 9 is very significant, also according to Bollinger here. Get this thing to go. Okay, the spiritual significance of the number 9. He starts off talking about the number 9 is the most remarkable number in many respects. It is held in great reverence by all who study the occult sciences and mathematical science, possess properties and powers which are found in no other number. Okay, we keep going here, and we'll go over to this point here. It says, it is akin to the number 6, 6 being the sum of its factors, 3 times 3 equals 9, and 3 plus 3 equals 6, and is thus significant of the end of man and the summation of all man's work. 9 is therefore the number of finality or judgment. For judgment is committed unto Jesus as the Son of Man. It marks the completeness, the end and issue of all things as to man, the judgment of man and all his works. It is a factor of 666, which is 9 times 74. The gematria word is Dan. He goes on and talks about his judge. And then now there's another series of numbers that are also embedded in this here. And he talks about this here. He says, it's interesting to notice why these numbers shouldn't be thus associated together. They're significant themselves, for 7 is one of the 4 so-called perfect numbers. 3, 7, 10, and 12, as we shall see below. 3 is the number of divine perfection. 7 is the number of spiritual perfection. 10 is the number of ordinal perfection. And 12 is the number of governmental perfection. The product of these 4 perfect numbers forms a great number of chronological perfection. You multiply all these numbers together, and what you get, 2520. The times of Israel's punishment and the times of the Gentile dominion over Jerusalem. So back to our little chart here. So if you look at the tribulation is basically 2 periods of 1,260 days. If you multiply that times 2, you get 2520 days in the tribulation. So the question is, okay, starting from this point here, we assume the tribulation, through this series of events, do we find those numbers? And if we count up the number of blood moons, again, using this as a period, we've got 3, 4, and 3, that gives us 10. We've got 7 blood moons to the tribulation. So starting from this location here, this is when the sign really begins here with the Lunar Tetrad, the number 7. We've got 7 blood moons, and then the tribulation begins. You have another 2 groups of 3 blood moons. There's a group here and a group here, so that's easy to get. And if you add up the total number of signs, if we count up the number of blood moons, you've got 10 blood moons, and then you have the solar eclipse, and you have the Revelation 12 sign for a grand total of 12 signs. You multiply that, you get the number of days in the tribulation. Just another little piece of trivia there that shows that something's going on here with this sign. It's interesting. It doesn't make or break it, but it is interesting. I think I've pretty much covered. I'm looking at my notes here. I don't see a whole lot of other things. I know there is a lot more to this. If you go and use that gematria thing and you type the 312 and some of these other numbers in there, you're going to see some really interesting things show up. I didn't bring those up because I didn't want this thing to be too long, and some were kind of controversial, but you go there, it's kind of fun to throw that in there. I just want to give a word of encouragement for all of you who have been watching and waiting for the Lord's return. I've been watching since about 1980. That tells you how old I am. this is an exciting time, but at the same time, it's trying in certain ways because you just it seems like it's just got to happen tomorrow, and it keeps going out and keeps getting pushed out and pushed out and pushed out. And you can only stay at a certain level of excitement. You have to live your life. You got to go do your job, do all the things you got to do. But the reality is, Jesus says, when you see all of these things coming, look up, for redemption draws near, and it is very, very near. And it is, I'm be very surprised if we go more than 2 years. We look at the signs in heaven. I think they're pointing, I really do. I think this is pointing to sometime in the next 2 years. I think, again, like I said, everything like what's going on in the world with all the earthquakes. I have earthquake software that the Dutch sends you guys have. I have that software, and things in North America and South America have really been picking up in the last month. So we're seeing a really big shift in the earth. All sorts of things are happening. The Lord's return is really imminent, and it's going to be really soon. And I think, again, like these blood moons, I think we've decoded this. It makes me feel, I feel really good about the 7 thing here. The 4 and 7. 7 is completion. The Revelation 12 sign, I'm always wondering how long would it be? Well, it really seems like this is pointing to this time. All these things are working together for the Lord's return. So again, thanks for watching. Keep looking up. Our time is short. Keep the faith. Hang in there. And we will hopefully see you either here next time. I don't know if I'll do another one of these or not, but we will see you. I think it was Ellie Marzulli here in the air. So have a good week, and God bless.